Have you ever wondered what happens when a person is ignored for so long that they stop believing they even exist? What happens when every smile hides unbearable pain, every laugh covers another scar, and every dream is crushed before it has a chance to grow? This is the story of a man who was never born a monster. He was created by a world that refused to see him. In one of the darkest cities ever imagined lived a lonely clown named Adrian. Every morning he woke up in a tiny apartment with peeling walls and a leaking ceiling. The city outside never slept, but no one noticed the man walking through its crowded streets with faded clothes and tired eyes. His only dream was simple. He wanted to make people smile. Life, however, had different plans. Children laughed at his appearance. Strangers mocked him without reason, and employers saw him as someone who could easily be replaced. Every day he painted a smile across his face, but behind the makeup was a man slowly falling apart. He would stand in front of a cracked mirror every morning, forcing himself to smile while silently asking the same question: does anyone even care if I exist? The city grew colder every day. Crime filled the streets, corruption ruled every corner, and kindness became something people barely remembered. Adrian wasn't rich. He wasn't powerful. He was simply invisible. As weeks passed, the pressure became unbearable. Bills piled up on the old kitchen table. The electricity flickered every night. His refrigerator was nearly empty. Yet he kept telling himself tomorrow would be better. Tomorrow never came. Every insult, every betrayal, every lonely night became another crack in his broken mind. He stopped trusting people. He stopped believing in hope. The smile he painted on his face no longer represented happiness. It became a mask hiding years of pain. One rainy evening, as thunder echoed across the city, Adrian stood alone beneath a flickering streetlight. Rain washed away part of his clown makeup, revealing tears mixing with the white paint. For the first time in years, he stopped pretending everything was fine. Something inside him changed. He no longer wanted the city's approval. He no longer wanted people to love him. He wanted the city to remember his name. From that night forward, the quiet entertainer disappeared. In his place stood someone who embraced chaos instead of fear. The broken smile became genuine, not because he had found happiness, but because he had stopped caring what the world thought of him. Before starting, please subscribe our channel and like the video. The city had created its own nightmare, and it didn't even realize it until it was too late. The next morning, nothing looked different. The streets were still crowded. The trains were still packed. The buildings still reached toward the grey sky. Yet something had changed. It wasn't the city. It was Adrian. For the first time in years, he walked without lowering his head. He no longer searched for approval in the eyes of strangers. Their opinions had become meaningless. Every insult he had ever heard echoed in his mind. But instead of breaking him, they fueled something far more dangerous. News reporters began talking about a mysterious clown who appeared in forgotten neighborhoods, standing silently on rooftops or watching crowds from the shadows. Nobody knew his name. Nobody knew where he came from. Stories spread faster than facts. Some believed he was a criminal. Others believed he was simply a symbol of everything the city had ignored for decades. People living in the poorest parts of the city started painting faded smiles on abandoned walls. It wasn't because they supported violence. It was because they finally felt someone understood their pain. Adrian never asked anyone to follow him. They chose to. Every evening he wandered through different streets, observing the lives around him. He saw exhausted workers returning home with empty pockets. He watched children searching trash bins for food while luxury cars drove past without slowing down. He witnessed people arguing over survival while powerful leaders celebrated another successful year. The more he observed, the quieter he became. Silence had become his greatest weapon. Meanwhile, the city's most influential businessmen dismissed the growing unrest as meaningless rumors. Politicians smiled in front of television cameras, promising change they never intended to deliver. Newspapers blamed ordinary citizens for problems they had never created. But beneath the surface, frustration continued to grow. One rainy night, Adrian climbed to the roof of an abandoned theater overlooking the entire city. Thousands of lights stretched across the horizon, like stars trapped beneath concrete. He stared into the distance for several minutes without speaking. Then he smiled. Not because he was happy, because he finally understood something. Fear could travel much faster than hope. Within days, anonymous posters appeared across the city. They carried no signature, no demands, no threats, only one sentence. The loudest scream is the one nobody hears. Nobody knew who had written those words, yet everyone talked about them. Detectives searched for clues but found nothing except abandoned buildings, faded footprints, and witnesses whose stories contradicted each other. Every investigation ended with more questions than answers. As public curiosity grew, Adrian remained. The beginning had been quiet. Now the city could no longer ignore the echoes. Every morning, people woke up to another strange symbol painted on abandoned walls, A. Simple white smile with A. Single tear beneath one eye. No names. No messages. Just a reminder that someone was watching the city. Not to control it, but to expose what everyone had chosen to ignore. Television hosts laughed at the rumors. Newspapers called it nothing more than street art. But ordinary people saw something different. To them, the symbol represented every broken promise, every sleepless night, every dream that had quietly disappeared. Adrian never claimed to be a hero. He never called himself a leader. In fact, he spent most of his nights alone, walking through empty streets, where the only sounds were distant sirens and rain tapping against cracked sidewalks. The silence reminded him of the life he had once lived, a life where nobody heard him no matter how loudly his heart screamed. One evening, while sitting on the roof of an abandoned apartment building, he looked down at the city below. Thousands of lights stretched across the horizon. Yet he couldn't help thinking, how many people behind those windows were hiding their own pain? He whispered to himself, everyone wears a mask. Mine is just easier to see. Days turned into weeks. The mysterious smile continued appearing across the city. People began gathering in forgotten neighborhoods, not to create chaos, but simply to talk. Strangers who had never spoken before shared stories about losing jobs, losing family members, and losing hope. For the first time in years, they felt someone understood them. Adrian watched from a distance. He realized something important. People didn't need another ruler. They needed someone who reminded them they were not invisible. That realization frightened him, because symbols often grow beyond the people who create them. Meanwhile, the city's powerful elite grew increasingly nervous. They couldn't arrest an idea. They couldn't erase a symbol painted on thousands of walls overnight. The more they tried to silence the movement, the more curious people became. Every attempt to hide the truth only made more people search for it. One stormy night, Adrian returned to the old comedy theater where he had once dreamed of making audiences laugh. Dust covered every seat. The stage lights no longer worked. The room was completely silent. He stood at center stage and imagined rows of smiling faces looking back at him. Years ago, he had wanted applause. Now he understood that applause disappears within seconds. Respect lasts much longer. As thunder shook the building, he stepped away from the stage and looked at one final poster hanging on the wall. It showed a smiling performer with the words, "Make the world laugh." Adrian gently removed the poster. He folded it carefully and placed it inside his coat, not because he wanted to remember who he had been,